Thank you, Presiding Officer. The centralisation of Police Scotland was opposed by this party almost in isolation, and we now stand vindicated in that opposition through the litany of failures and missteps by the High Command of Police Scotland that have undermined policing in this country since its merger, in the subterranean morale of our hard-working frontline police officers, and in the decimation of backroom support staff, which has seen treble 9 calls go unheeded and beat cops repeatedly taken off task to perform backroom functions. The recent high-profile and shambolic travails in the upper echelons of the unified force are just the latest in a long list of disasters to have rocked policing in this country. And I see the social costs of this flawed legislation that underpins it in the casework that comes in through my constituency surgeries, in the meetings I have with local police chiefs, and even in the way we lock up our house at night. Because despite an insistence from the government that community-level policing would remain unchanged, we immediately, from 2013 onwards, felt the irresistible gravitational pull of Strathclyde policing culture on Edinburgh beats. And straight out of the traps, we saw a major shift in the way that policing happens on the streets of our nation's capital. Dedicated house-breaking teams were broken up and retasked to focus on responding to a spectre of knife crime which had never actually taken hold in this city, a decision which led then, perhaps unsurprisingly, to an epidemic in house burglaries and car thefts, an uptick which has endured to this day with a rash of break-ins in my own community of Blackhall just this past week. Policing of the sex industry was also brought into question, where the soft regulation of tolerance zones and licensed saunas in Edinburgh, which retained a focus on keeping workers safe, was challenged by Police Scotland with a zero-tolerance approach. This could have driven the industry back into the shadows and removed the protections offered by the city to sex workers. Glasgow solutions for Edinburgh problems. This was symptomatic of the reality that for Police Scotland, with its newfound size, came an inflated sense of power. Liam MacArthur has already described the worst excesses of that in the refusal of the Chief Constable to recognise the will of Highland Council in its opposition to armed officers routinely patrolling Highland communities. Presiding Officer, this attitude undermined the principle of policing by consent in this country, and by so doing fundamentally damaged the social contract which has existed between the police and our communities for 100 years and more. And 4 years on, the government is still trying to get this right. Now, I like Susan Deakin, I'm impressed by her, but her appointment represents just another roll of the dice in efforts by the SNP to fix flawed legislation and organisational structure with the introduction of a personality. But for as long as the precepts which underpin centralisation remain unchallenged, the culture and flawed structures will continue to blight that founding vision. So I'm proud to stand with my colleagues today in calling for reform. For reform is certainly needed. We need to get to a space where local communities and councils can once again determine and set the objectives and priorities of local policing, where the police authority is democratically appointed by this Parliament, and where the powers of the police constable are anchored in statute, thereby simultaneously restoring and guaranteeing that most liberal principle of policing by consent in this country. Thank you.
Thank you.